Moment exceptional.
What do Jose Barrero and a Big Red Machine legend have in common? I'm going to tell you what on today's final Aloha Friday edition of the Locked On Reds podcast.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Aloha! You are Locked On Reds. Thanks for making Locked On Reds your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and we are free and available on all podcasting platforms. I'm your host, Stephen Offenbaker, alongside Jeff Carr, and we are diehard baseball fans. We have a passion for the Cincinnati Reds, and we've taken our love of the game, our passion for baseball, and we've turned that passion into information for you. As Jeff mentioned, this is our last Aloha Friday live show of the offseason. This will come back again next offseason, and we've got some surprises for you along the way as far as live shows go, but this is going to be the last one. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking about Jose Barrero and how he compares to a Big Red Machine great. And speaking of the Big Red Machine, we are also going to talk about a trend they started way back when in 1978. And then, of course, we're going to be taking your questions and comments all along the way. Before we dive into Jose Barrero, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, Jeff, you've put together some doozies over the course of this last year, but this one, I can't wait to see what you do with this, because you want to compare Jose Barrero to an all-time beloved Cincinnati Big Red Machine great. So are we going to be adding somebody else to this list? You know, Jeff hates Jonathan India. Jeff hates Joey Votto. Oh, we good. Who do you hate on the Big Red Machine? Jeff hates Johnny Bench. Is that what we're doing?
No. This is not a Jeff hates. By the way, I don't hate anybody, but this is not a Jeff hates this person. This is I was looking at the numbers, and there's a comparison here to be made. First of all, say his name. Davey Concepcion and Jose Barrero have something in common. And no, I'm not talking about the career of Davey Concepcion that was pretty awesome. 9-time All-Star, 5-time Gold Glove Award winner. He won the All-Star Game MVP. He won a couple of World Series with the Big Red Machine. He even once hit 300 for an entire season. I understand that. Before all of that happened, Davy Concepcion was in the same position that Jose Barrero was in, because if we'd have given the same timeline to Davy Concepcion that we're currently giving to Jose Barrero to figure things out, he never would have been part of the Big Red Machine.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because but here's the big point. Jose Barrero has 282 career at-bats in Major League Baseball. Do we really know Jose Barrero? Do we know what we don't know about Jose Barrero? And let me throw these at you, because this is what I'm talking about. 970 career at-bats in his first 3 seasons for Davy Concepcion. The man batted .221, and he got on base 27% of the time, and he struck out 161 times. Now, if you account for baseball inflation when it comes to batting averages going down, slugging percentages coming up, on-base percentages coming up, you're looking at pretty much the same career numbers for Jose Barrero in his first 282 at-bats. Like, yes, he's hit $170. He's got on base 21% of the time, but we're talking about essentially the same thing. The Reds gave almost 1,000 at-bats to Davy Concepcion before they really made a decision, and he started clicking around that 1,000th at-bat.
See what you're trying to do here. One of the things I think with Davy, we're talking about the 1970s, the shortstop position was not expected to be an offensive producer. That was predominantly a defense first position. If you had a great glove and could hit your weight, basically, you were considered serviceable. So I don't know that the pressure level was the same for Davy Concepcion. I don't know that the expectation level was as high as it is for Jose Barrero. And I know that sounds strange when we're talking about the Big Red Machine and knowing all of the things that they did, but it was just a different time in baseball. That being said, your point is not lost on me. Have we been unfair to Jose Barrero? Yes. Did the Reds rush him along too soon with the whole COVID season and Prasco Park and all of those things? Yeah, I think they did. I think the Reds bear some responsibility on kind of derailing the progress that Jose Barrero was making in his minor league career. If Prasco hadn't happened, if the COVID season hadn't happened, we would probably only last year have been talking about Jose Barrero making his debut versus, a player that's been around for multiple years. I think basically the Reds cheated Jose Barrero out of time to get himself a little bit more right before having to figure out major league pitching. That being said, because they have brought in so much young talent, his days are numbered and his time to figure it out is limited. The one thing that he has going for him is he does still have an option. There is some opportunity if he gets pushed off his position to go and figure some things out and come back. But, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you do with Jose Barrero at this point, Jeff, because he's got to get it. He's got to play well enough to keep a spot somewhere on the field. These young guys are going to push him out the door.
And I want to frame this discussion in the light of today, in the light of opening day, the first month of the season, things like that. Because when it comes to Jose Barrero, yes, he has a ton of pressure based on how the shortstop position has evolved. There are so many superstars at that position. There are so many just amazing hitters that play shortstop now, but also the fact that the Reds have so many amazing players come through the system. You got Elly De La Cruz, who he should be up here by May for all intents and purposes if Jose Barrero doesn't figure it out. But I feel like there are people that are already done with him. They're already like, yeah, we know what we know. We know that he's not good. We know that he's never going to figure it out. And he's barely played, because there's two ways to look at him. There are some folks that are looking like, well, he's already played 3 years. He should have it figured out by now. But he has 282 at-bats. And if you take into account the walks, which are few and far between, and the different plate appearances that don't count for at-bats, he still has under 300 total plate appearances for his entire career. So it's something that, has he had a cup of coffee? No. It's probably like if you were to go to Starbucks, you got like a venti cup of coffee. It's a big cup of coffee. But he has not had enough time to where we can confidently say we know he cannot figure it out.
The Reds were much more patient with Aristides Aquino and gave him much more time to figure things out. Then we're giving
that's
Jose
a blueprint.
Barrero.
We got like 2 more years of Jose Barrero.
Right. Exactly. It's just, I don't think we'd be having the push Jose Barrero aside conversations that we're having if the Reds hadn't gone out and got those other prospects. If it was Jose Barrero or whatever rented shortstop they go out and get each offseason, Jose Barrero would have a lot more time to figure these things out. He wouldn't be being pushed off the roster. It's an unreasonable expectation for sure. And it's definitely what I hope ends up being a motivator, Jeff. I really hope that the writing on the wall helps bring him along. There's been some flashes. He's looked a little bit different in spring training. The little bit we've got to see of him as far as televised games go. I mean, he does look like he is changing things up, even though with one spring training is not enough time to see if those changes are going to stick, if those changes are going to produce the results that will keep him around. The only thing that's going to tell us that is the baseball he plays in the month of April. So I hope the Reds run him out there every day. I don't want to see Kevin Newman start a game in the month of April. It needs to be Jose Barrero.
And I understand that the argument is Elly De La Cruz, not Jose Barrero, but I think that we need to at least give him the month of April. And maybe even that is being unfair, but I think that in the month of April, we're going to see some things with Jose Barrero because we've already started to see them in spring. It's just, it didn't start at the beginning of spring, so he's not hitting 600 like Christian Encarnacion Strand. But it's something that I wanted to note because I firmly believe that you're talking about a guy who, if everyone says they know what they know about Jose Barrero, I want to come back and ask you, are you sure? Because I'm not. And I know you're not, Steve. So yeah, if we'd have given the same timeline to Davy Concepcion, then dude's not making the big red machine because they would have already moved on. But you know what? Speaking of Davy Concepcion, he had some feelings about a very iconic thing that the Reds did a long time ago, and it has something to do with St. Patty's Day. I'm going to talk to you about what that is coming up next. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is the Ultimate GM. I'm really excited about the Ultimate Baseball GM app. It is a wonderful game that you can play on your phone. You download it today. You can literally play it offline. You don't need any internet connection. The game puts a major league front office in your pocket and on the go. It's free to download in the App Store or on the Google Play Store today. You can take a franchise from the bottom to the top of the league as you play Ultimate GM wherever and whenever you want. You control everything from player trades and contract signings to ticket prices and team facilities. This is literally the franchise game mode of MLB The Show. The only thing that you don't do is you don't play, each individual baseball game, but you play through seasons. You watch a team grow. You build your dynasty. Check out one of the most realistic baseball simulations that I've ever seen right on your mobile device today. Download Ultimate GM Baseball on the App Store or Google Play Store. Plus, you can go to probaseballgm.com and also download that, or scan this QR code that's here in the corner today and download the app. Plus, Locked On Reds listeners get a 100% free bonus on your franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. So again, go to probaseballgm.com, scan this code here in the corner, the QR code, or go to the App Store or the Google Play Store. That's probaseballgm.com. Ultimate Baseball GM. Start your dynasty today. Coming up on Monday, where are we on the opening day roster? Because we're getting close. We're getting close enough to opening day that you can smell it, right? You can just feel the excitement. You can smell great. I can. Maybe that's just the St. Patty's Day talking, but I'm ready for opening day, Steve. And I know you are too. But speaking of St. Patty's Day, the Reds just know what it is. And they got the green uniforms going. And when it comes to, this wonderful holiday that I love so much and you love so much, the Reds were the first to wear that green uniform. You pulled a me.
I pulled a Jeff. You know, they were the first team to roll out what has now become a trend throughout baseball, which is the St. Patrick's Day jersey, the green jersey. Switched to my green jersey for you YouTube folks. It was like a Oscar's wardrobe change around here while Jeff was talking. Got it done. Made it back without any errors. Good for me. So the Reds did this in 1978, and it was a surprise for the fans. It was not announced. Nobody knew about it until the team came out to warm up, but it wasn't as well received by the players as you might think. Several of the players spoke out against wearing the green jersey. We just spent the first segment comparing Jose Barrero to Davy Concepcion, and he didn't like it at all. He walked in and looked at his locker and looked at his jersey and squinted at it, and he said, "I'm not wearing that. I'm Venezuelan. I'm not Irish." And I mean, you know, I get it. It was something different, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about the green jerseys and St. Patrick's Day, because, you know, we're doing this final live show on St. Patrick's Day. And, you know, the Reds at one time, the reason I wanted to bring this, look at you already pre-gaming. The Reds at one time, you know, were trendsetters. They were the team going out there and doing things differently. They built dynasties, they set trends, they did the things they had to do to win. And man, I wish I lived in that time, because it's different now. But, you know, so let's start with this, Jeff. Do you like the alternate jersey looks? I know that the Reds are going to get City Connect jerseys this year, and we're not quite sure what they're going to look like. I saw something online, people saying that they might actually be like a lot of black, and I don't know. But do you like that kind of thing?
I do. I think that especially a 162 game season, it lends itself to being creative with your jerseys a little bit. I mean, 162 games, you want to have some different combinations that you can kind of go to. That's why, you know, at first I wasn't the biggest proponent of the script Reds. Now I'm okay with it. I've always been a guy that I wished, and it's not as if it would make a whole lot of sense, because right now it's pretty cold and rainy here in Cincinnati, so I wouldn't want there to be an actual regular season game on a day like today. But I kind of miss the fact that St. Patty's Day happens during spring training, because I would love to see the green uniforms in the regular season. And as far as the City Connect jerseys go, I was reading something about that. C. Trent had some thoughts in a mailbag on The Athletic, and he was talking about that he's seen them, and he can't, you know, divulge exactly what they are, but to suffice it to say, this, you're right, there's lots of black in the uniform. And my only hope, and my hope has been ever since these City Connect jerseys came out, and it was said that the Reds would be one of the last teams to invoke them and use them, I just don't want them to be taken too seriously. Like, I want them to have fun with the jersey. Now, maybe not look at as, you know, goofy as, you know, some of my thoughts have been, you know, i.e. a Hawaiian shirt with just Cincinnati Chili and Fiona the Hippo on it. But you also could have a lot more fun than maybe some other teams. Like, I think of the worst ones. I really don't like the Giants. It's very not imaginative, like whatever. It's like all white or whatever. I don't really care for that. I don't like the Dodgers ones because they literally didn't change anything except for the wording on the jerseys. Like, and as long as our City Connect jerseys don't look like Great Britain's jerseys from the World Baseball Classic, you know, I think we're going to be all right.
You know, of the City Connects, I didn't like San Diego. I hope Carlos isn't listening today. He's going to yell at me. I didn't like San Diego's very much. But, you know, speaking of the green jerseys in the regular season, you may not have caught this, Jeff. They have been using them in the regular season for the last couple years. You got to read the promotion schedule, Jeff. I know you don't pay attention to the promotion schedule, but the Reds do a Irish Heritage Day in each season. Do you have it right there in front of you? That's hilarious. Irish Heritage season, Irish Heritage game, something along those lines. At any rate, they've worn the green jerseys during the regular season in that game. So that gives you hope to get to see them out at Great American Ballpark this year.
TLDR. But yes, I'm looking forward to that day because I like the idea of having these different alternate jerseys. It's something that I think the NBA has done very well, whether you're talking about the really cool, like sunset looking jerseys that the Utah Jazz have, or the just really neon, like Miami Vice jerseys that the Heat have, or something like that. Like, I wish the Reds would tap into some sort of creative, artistic look. Like, maybe they had to get Cam Miller on the phone or something. I feel like Cam would have a good idea as to how to make those jerseys just absolutely pop and look fantastic. But I know we're going to see those at some point. They're keeping those under lock and key. Like, I almost wonder if we're going to hear about when Ellie De La Cruz gets called up before when we hear about what the City Connect jerseys look like, because they're just protecting these things.
I'm just waiting for him to show up on a hanger on eBay. That's how we're going to see the
Yeah.
That's how we're going to see these.
It's going to be in the jersey. Like, remember when they were announcing like players that were being signed in spring training a couple of years ago because they saw their nameplate in the locker room? That's how we're going to find out about the jersey.
Well, one thing's for sure. It is St. Patrick's Day. There's a green jersey available to you. So get your green jersey on, get out on the town tonight, have your corned beef and cabbage, have your shepherd's pie, have your Guinness, have your Jamesons, because we're good Catholic Irish people around here. I'm just kidding. If you drink Bushmills, go crazy. Either way, have a responsible fun time as you're out celebrating St. Patrick's Day tonight. And with that being said, it's time to get ready for my favorite part of the Aloha Friday. I can't even talk today, Jeff, and I haven't even been joining you in drink. It's my favorite time of the Aloha Friday shows, and that is the questions and comments. We're going to get to put you all in the driver's seat coming up right after this. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about one of the sponsors of today's podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. We are only days. I'm just going to start saying only days. I know it's double digits still, but only days away from opening day. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's a bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So you can feel confident in joining Jeff and taking the over in whatever crazy thing he's taking the over on, because FanDuel is going to give you that money back up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you listen to Jeff and you are wrong. Just to get your bonus bets, all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more, because you can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. And now that sports betting is legal in Ohio, Locked On has the perfect show to help both new and seasoned gamblers. Download and subscribe to the Locked On Bets podcast for your daily picks and analysis. Locked On Bets is available wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked On Reds. Speaking of Locked On Reds, you can follow the show on all platforms, including right here on YouTube. Click the notification bell and the subscribe buttons below so that you never miss any of our new content. The lives are going to be a little bit different now that we're going to be in season, and you don't want to miss those. So have that notification bell on. You will be notified when we go live. In between shows, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at S. Offenbaker with 2 F's. You can follow Jeff at Jeff Carr. That's Jeff with 3 F's. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. All right, Jeffrey, we are arriving now at question and comment time. I'm very excited.
I just got the update on my phone that Xavier is trailing Kennesaw State at halftime. So it's the most Cincinnati thing ever that we're just a team that hasn't been to the tournament in so long, like Kennesaw State. Yeah. Oh, well. Go UC. Go Bearcats.
All right, let's get into this. We're going to start with Mark McWhorter, because he talks about your guy, Hunter Strickland. He says Strickland on the roster would rather have Law if we were carrying a batting practice pitcher.
There's about 50 pitchers I'd rather have on the roster than Hunter Strickland. Let's be honest.
I want to clarify again. I want to say this again because it made me feel icky listing Hunter Strickland. It's not what I wanted. I would much prefer to have anybody else. Bennett Souza being one for a lefty. A couple other guys. That Young is another guy that could have been a lefty out of, these are moves that make sense. Just I'm having a hard time still right now today as we do this, believing that they're not going to bring Hunter Strickland with the bullpen.
I think I find myself trying to get attached to different pitchers, once other pitchers, because I was attached to Ricky Karcher. I really wanted him to make the opening day roster. And since he got sent down to minor league camp, now it's like, okay, who else? Bennett Sousa, Alex Young. The more I watch Alex Young, I'm kind of intrigued. And I would like to see him make the opening day roster. There is nothing, and I don't know why, and we have speculated as to why. I don't know why Hunter Strickland is in the plans. There's nothing about him that intrigues me. There's plenty of other guys that are in camp that intrigue me. Get one of them. Just get one of them. I'm done with Hunter Strickland. There's no value there.
Let's stay in the bullpen. Malachi says Joe Kuhnel is playing great in spring training. Why does no one see him making the bullpen? Well, for me, when I sat down with all of those pitchers, I tried to look at it through how I thought Nick Krall would look at it, and that would take into account flexibility as far as options. That would take into account, how you wanted to build the back end of the bullpen, et cetera, how you wanted to carry two long relievers based on who your fourth and fifth starters were, all those things. So for me, Joe Kuhnel still has an option available, so he could be sent down and protected. So I feel like, yeah, he has pitched well enough to be in consideration for this bullpen, but I think that the realities of the roster make him a candidate to go to Louisville and be one of the first guys up if somebody doesn't perform and gets cut or gets injured.
He was a guy, remember when we were talking about the statistic of XFIP, expected fielding independent pitching, was actually pretty kind to him last year. Said that he was a better pitcher than his ERA had said. So I'd be more interested to watch him pitch than Hunter Strickland for sure. I think that there should definitely be a better consideration. I firmly believe that David Bell wanted Hunter Strickland back, and I firmly believe that Nick Krall wants anybody else. Nick Krall has shown himself to, be smart when it comes to roster building. It's just for some reason David Bell and Hunter Strickland, I don't know if they went golfing one time and David Bell lost a lot of money to him and he owes a lot of money to him. I don't know what the deal is, but I just feel like Hunter Strickland, at least in my optimistic heart, was brought in for depth during the World Baseball Classic with all the different relief pitchers, on their different teams and stuff like that. I'm with you. There's a better than 50% chance he ends up on the opening day roster simply because we know the Reds are the Reds.
Exactly. Malachi also dropped this in, and I'm going to use this probably by way of a tease because I didn't read this yet. I was wondering if you did, Jeff. He says, did you see The Athletic posted today an article about MLB contract extensions? Do we agree with the amount and number of years for Tyler Stephenson and Jonathan India? I haven't read this yet. It's like not even 8 a.m. here in Hawaii, folks. I got up early just to be with you. But Jeff, let's make a note of this. We can revisit this maybe on Monday's show.
I agree because I'm trying to look it up right now and I don't want to just,
Yeah, let's not just gloss over it, but that sounds like an interesting topic, Malachi. So we will we'll put that on the list and we will take a look at that on Monday's episode.
Quickly, here we go. Tyler Stephenson, 5 years, $42 million. I'm all in on that. 5 years, $42 million. That sounds really cheap for him.
Sign it.
I do that yesterday. I can't seem to find. Oh, here we go. Jonathan India, 5 years, $33 million. Okay. Tyler.
Well, I guess we're doing this now. Let's
sorry, I was scrolling through to see if I could find it, and 5 years, $48 million. 5 years, $33 million for those two guys. Holy crap! Yeah. If whatever the reasoning is that you're not signing that contract, if you're the Reds, I want to hear it because getting Jonathan India for just a smidge over $6 million a year and getting Tyler Stephenson for just a smidge over $8 million a year sounds like way better than anything that I had cooked up in my imagination.
So that's roughly $50 million in payroll, right? One was 20 something, one was 30 something. That's what you said.
40 and 30. So it'd be like total 70, but it would be over 5 years.
Right. So the Reds can afford that. I'm all for signing both of those guys. if I can only have one, I've told you before, I would rather have Tyler Stephenson because I think we can replace India as far as that position. We've got that depth. Catcher, much harder. I know that, we're using Tyler in other ways, but I would sign that deal. I would do it in a heartbeat.
We'll go a little bit more in depth on that on Monday because that is very interesting. But I don't know who wrote that because it was a league-wide look. That feels cheap. I'm not gonna lie. That feels cheap.
I'm gonna get into a topic now that's gonna get Jeff riled up a little bit, I think. But let's do it. Chad, the quirky picker, talking about Edwin Diaz. He's expected to miss the season after tearing a tendon, celebrating in that wild World Baseball Classic game. It is a real bummer, Chad. But I put that up because speculation has arisen again, Jeff, that the Mets want his brother, your favorite relief pitcher, Alexis Diaz. Now, I know the Mets checked in on Alexis Diaz last season and deemed the Reds asking price a little bit too high. But the situation has changed now with the other Diaz brother not being available to pitch. Alexis Diaz was going to be basically a setup man for them, and they had a cap on what they were willing to pay for that. Yep. With them now needing a closer, does that change things? And if you're the Reds, do you seriously consider trading Alexis Diaz?
The only reason, and it's interesting because shout out to Crazy, I've been talking with him on Twitter about this. The only reason I'm trading Alexis Diaz is if the Mets call and ask, and Nick Kroll says, this conversation starts with Brett Beatty, and they don't immediately hang up the phone. Because Brett Beatty is a guy who's in the Rookie of the Year conversation. He is going to be a phenomenal player. And if you could get Brett Beatty for this, because make no mistake about it, Alexis Diaz is not your average run-of-the-mill, acquire him at the deadline closer. He is controllable at a very cheap number for the next 5 years. 5 years. We're not talking about 2. We're not talking about 3. We're talking about 5 years. So I want to just absolutely gouge anybody that has any notion that they're going to come get Alexis Diaz. If you give me Brett Beatty, sure, we'll talk about that. But there is no realm of reality where the Mets should even consider that. But the Reds should not go lower than that either.
Okay, I like you setting the asking price high. I will tell you this, that I don't think there's a relief pitcher in baseball that I wouldn't trade. Just the nature of relief pitching and how from year to year, the ups and downs of relief pitchers. And there are some rare exceptions that are consistent and always good, but I would trade them too. Listen, if you can bring in somebody like Beatty that's going to be a big infusion of young controllable talent, then you do it. And if it costs you relief pitching, you absolutely do it. So I'm all in on that. Look, I'd be sad. And I like having Alexis Diaz here, and we'll find another closer tomorrow. It's
and that's something that, people talk about the bullpen and they're like, okay, this bullpen kind of looks rough. And I'm like, well, if you got Alexis Diaz and Lucas Sims at the top, you got to feel a little bit better about it. So then you don't trade from an area of depth. You trade from an area that's very shallow. Then you have to factor that into the deal. Like, this deal has to make almost no sense for the team that's actually trading for Alexis Diaz. Like, Brett Beatty is going to start for the New York Mets this year. There's no realm of reality where they should entertain a deal like that, but that's where I'm starting this conversation. And I agree. There is no such thing as a untouchable relief pitcher, but Alexis Diaz is high enough on that list that is where the discussions should start.
All right. Well, let's see how this plays out, because the talk is definitely heating up. Our buddy BR7 drops in saying happy last Aloha Friday. He's going to miss the Aloha Fridays until next year. Says that he has no idea what to do with this hula skirt now. Well, sir, post a picture of yourself wearing it on Twitter and make sure you tag Jeff. That's Jeff with 3 Fs. Let's see what that skirt looks like.
I may or may not have a hula skirt on underneath. That's why we're, from the chest up.
Oh man, don't put that image in people's heads.
This has been great though. I love every Aloha Friday that we've had. This is absolutely going to be a staple of our off-season content moving forward. Like we've said, as we move toward the regular season, It's going to be a little bit more of a moving target. We're going to kind of pinpoint some games where we're excited about that game. It's a big matchup, a big pitching matchup or something like that. And we're going to have a live pregame show. It won't be near this long, but it'll be a live option for our YouTube folks. So I'm very happy that we've gotten to do this.
Yeah, and that's exactly Mr. E was saying. Why has it got to be the final one? I thought we were supposed to be doing these every day during the regular season. He thinks we're bluffing. He thinks we're bluffing. No, so with these live shows, part of it is, our availability. Part of it is to be able to do it during a time where you guys, the listeners, can participate. And with game preps and 5 day a week covering games and all, it's just the timing doesn't work out for us. But we are going to be coming at you live, like Jeff was saying. We're going to find ways to keep having lives throughout. I just don't think we can work it into a weekly schedule every single week and be able to meet that with consistency. But listen, we are so glad that you guys enjoy the live show and that you're here for it. And we will definitely be bringing it back.
And that is where we're going to wrap up today's audio portion of the episode. For everybody here on YouTube, make sure you hang on. We're about to get into the exclusive Q&A session here, but wanted to wrap it up for our audio folks. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up on Monday, where are we on the opening day roster? And now that Malachi has asked us, we are definitely going to throw this in there on Monday. Contract extensions for Tyler Stephenson and Jonathan India. We will speculate wildly. Thanks for making Locked On Reds your first listen. Now make Locked On Fantasy Baseball your second listen. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. They, just like Locked On Reds, are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Steve, we are into bonus time. We're into the Q&A session. This is where you, the watcher, I guess now at this point, get to drive the show. Comments, questions are all welcome within reason.
Within reason. Hey, look, I'm low energy today. Look at this. Because it's always, I put the ones that pick on you up usually.
Did you just come from work, or are you about to go to work?
No, I work. Okay. I worked last night. I go to work. I worked yesterday. I go to work tonight. I'm all over the place this week, but the time changed, you guys. You know that whole spring forward, fall back thing?
Yeah.
We don't do that here. So now it's a 6-hour time difference. So I had to get up at the crack of unreasonable this morning to be ready for this. So yeah, my coffee didn't kick in right away. So yes, I was a little low energy. I apologize. I'll do better. All right. I'm sorry.
I love daylight savings time.
See, Mr. E gets it. During the regular season, it's more about coverage than live broadcast. Thanks, Mr. E. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get across. Appreciate you.
We're going to be here for you guys every step of the way for sure.
Ronnie Snyder says if Jose Barrero can be like Concepcion, he'll take that all day long. Well, yeah. I don't know that Jose Barrero is ever going to hit 300.
No.
And Jose Barrero has more power. You're right.
That's the big difference here. Jose Barrero's got more power and he's going to hit for less average. I think, the best projection we could have that if Jose Barrero figures this out, he's probably going to hit 260, but he's going to slug like, 450, 460, something like that. I think we're looking at a dude who could be a very serviceable, back end of the lineup type dude.
There's comments are great. 70% of Concepcion would work. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
No, and that's I know what you're saying, Jeff. I mean, you're not saying he's gonna be Davey Concepcion. You're just saying that career. Yeah. Right.
And it's interesting to note too, because it's a statistic that Davey Concepcion fans are not going to like. It's a statistic that you and I love. OPS plus. His first 3 years, Davey Concepcion was under 100. All 3 years, and it was like 70, 55, and like 60.
How timely with your OPS plus reference. Jared on Vinyl says Jared. The Reds would be in a good place if Barrero posted anything near 100 for OPS plus or league average. So
I think his OPS plus last year was 11. So yeah,
so nowhere to go but up, baby. Nowhere to go but up. Carlton says the Big Red Machine could also support a light hitter. This is true. They weren't relying on Davey to be a run producer or to drive in guys. Again, it's a different era of baseball. They were looking at him as defense first. And I mean, when you've got all those other guys ripping the ball up in the lineup, if Davey gets on, great. It's a bonus. If he doesn't get on, but get you that put out in the next half inning, then that's great. And
people didn't cover the minor leagues back then the way they do now. Like there was no such thing as prospect rankings, or if there weren't like widely reported or anything. And I don't ever think there was a situation where Davey Concepcion was considered like the top prospect in their system or a top 50 prospect in all of baseball. So yeah, the expectations are much higher for Jose Barrero, and he's got more to live up to. But I made that point to say this is that I feel like we haven't given him enough time and there's so many Reds fans right now that are just like, yeah, we're done with him. Get rid of him. Like I saw too, shout out to our buddy Scott Campbell. He had mentioned that, the Mariners are in need of a shortstop. And he said, should the Reds try and trade Jose Barrero? And I'm like, I mean, maybe you're literally trading on potential. And I don't even know that they're giving you anything for that.
Yeah, and that's one of those deals where we talk about where you're like, oh my God, that dude's terrible. Let's trade him. And you're like, well, who's going to take him? Well, Jose Barrero's not been great. So, I mean, you could get somebody to do a trade of scenery, prospect swap kind of thing, but you'd be getting just the same amount of project work back in return. I'm not quite ready to give up on Jose Barrero. I don't think.
Not either.
Austin,
and I think maybe if he,
Austin questions his defense too. He says if Barrero were a stellar defender, he'd be okay waiting on him. So far, he's not been great. Austin goes on to say, or am I wrong about his defense? I've not been looking at stats, just recalling from last year. How would you rate Barrero defensively right now?
Inconsistent. I mean, I think that he makes really good plays, but there's also some plays where it's like that seems pretty routine and he kind of botched it. And I think there's an element of, man, I've been struggling at the plate a lot. I got to overcompensate with this. And then he gets inside his head too much. Like, as somebody who sucked at fielding in high school, I can tell you, you get in your head a little bit if you start making errors. And one error turns into 2 or 3 if you're not careful. So I think that, coming up through the minors, his glove was considered a strength. His arm was considered a strength. It's just because we've seen so many different struggles from him at the plate, it feels like it's kind of creeped into his fielding game a little bit.
Mark says another Friday that Aristides Aquino makes an appearance. That is 2 in a row. I don't know why that keeps
I was on a
Jeff.
show and I'm not going to call the guy out for it. And I've had fun talking with this guy before, but one of his first questions was, what do we expect from Aristides Aquino this season? And I'm like, I expect him to do really well in Japan. So he just like,
just answer the first question. We're just like, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was like, he's not here anymore, thankfully.
Malachi asking about Spencer Steer. Let's move off of Barrero for a little while. I'm sure it'll come back up as we work through
these. By Cowboy.
Spencer Steer.
Yeah,
I wish I got the radio broadcast. So I use the MLB.TV app. In spring, the audio feeds aren't available in the app all the time like they are during the regular season. And in order to make it work, I have to find multiple apps and sync and do. And I just don't. I listen to the visitors broadcast at that point. But he says, are we worried about Spencer Steer's defense? Did it have anything to do with his defense, or what was the?
It's a little bit of that. It was kind of a routine play that he botched. It was a bad throw that was down the baseline. It pulled Joey off the bag. Joey tried to make a tag, didn't quite work. That happened in the most recent game that I'm remembering. But also, I was talking with Lance a little bit about this because Cowboy just absolutely went in on him and was very poignant of his criticism of Spencer Steer. He's just like, you're supposed to be the everyday third baseman, and you're making a lot of easy mental mistakes. But I will also say, spring is where you want to make those mistakes, and you just kind of get those under, you get those out of the way early. And I don't think it's an error issue. I think, listen, if there's no chance that he is a worse fielder than Edwin Encarnacion. There's no chance. Edwin Encarnacion was abysmal at third base. And had the DH existed in the National League, back then, I low-key wonder if we ever would have traded him for Scott Rowland, or if he would have just stayed on the team until he became a free agent or whatever, but we would have seen that renaissance with his bat in Cincinnati. Spencer Steer can really hit. And while we don't necessarily project him as an everyday player at a certain position, whenever this team has a good roster that is good enough that we start talking playoffs, I still think that bat plays. And you got to get that bat in the lineup somehow. And right now the Reds just don't have a third baseman. So I think that you live with below average defense. I don't think Spencer Steer is bad at defense.
I don't either. I think he plays, average defense at multiple positions, which is an above average benefit to the Reds, if that makes any sense. BR7 says after the game the other night, he's worried about Steer. Cowboy said he wasn't hustling down the line to first. That worries him and all the bad plays. It makes BR7 wonder. This is interesting to me because I have not really heard a lot of negative talk surrounding Spencer Steer. I mean, in fact, your whole year of the Steer to drink a beer while you cheer, or whatever it is that you were doing, has been positive, considering him to be in contention to be a rookie of the year.
Let's be clear. Spencer Steer is here, and he's going to be phenomenal. I think it was one of those days. Like, I mean, baseball players are people too. People have days, you have a day at work. I have a day at work that it's just like, did anything go right that day? No, but you know what? We got tomorrow.
All right, Malachi back in the feed talking about which of the two that we talked about with the extension has a brighter future. Is it Stephenson or India? I don't know how to say this without ending up in the Jeff hates Jonathan India fan club. I feel like Jonathan India is more easily replaced. I'm not saying that Jonathan India is not good. I'm not saying that Jonathan India is not a valuable component to this team. And I love how, he's worked on himself in the offseason. He's trying to be a leader. He's trying to really help move this team forward as far as being better. But I think you can go replace that guy. I think you can go get another of these young prospects to give you an equal amount of defense, to give you an equal amount of offense thus far that India has put up. I think you can find that. Finding a guy that can be the majority of the time your catcher, plus fill in at other positions, add over a run per average scored when he's in the lineup versus when he's not. All of those impacts from Tyler Stephenson, I think, make him much more valuable in this Reds lineup, much more valuable to this Reds team, and thus make him harder to replace if you don't keep him around. So for me, the answer is Tyler Stephenson.
Man, it's close. And I think that the way that you laid that out, I think I probably would lead like 51% Stephenson, 49% India. I think there's also a question to be had. What's more valuable, a RBI producer or the guy that's on base that the RBI producer scores? Like leadoff hitter or, second, third, fourth hitter, something like that. Because I think Jonathan India has figured it out. And there's been articles that I've seen about, will Jonathan India figure out what type of player he is? I think he's figured it out already, and we as fans are going to see it happen this year. He knows he's a leadoff hitter. He knows he's a catalyst. He knows he's a guy that needs to get on base and then can be dangerous on the base paths. So you're talking about two different types of players. And it's very interesting to me how you would quantify that, because the RBI producer isn't good at his job if there aren't RBIs to produce. So I kind of go back and forth as to who's more valuable. I think I'm with you. I think it's just slightly leaning toward Stephenson at this point, also because of the defense that we saw from India last year. But I am in the camp that I think that India will improve defensively and improve in the areas that he knows he can be good at this year.
Malachi says if Stephenson can stay healthy, he believes he can be a top catcher in the league.
That's a given.
And this brings me something I saw in the comments sometime this week, I think. There was a question about Tyler Stephenson and how will all of this moving around first base, DH, all these things impact his ability to be selected as an all-star? And, I thought that was a good question, but I don't think that it will. I don't think that it will. I think that, he's going to be there. That's going to be his primary position. As David Bell has said, he's going to catch roughly 40% of the time. He's going to be at first base a couple days a week. He'll get some more starts at designated hitter, but he's going to be listed as a catcher. He's going to be voted on as a catcher. And if managers select him, if he's not a top vote getter, he's going to be added to the team by another manager as a catcher.
Yeah, I go back through like the last 15 or so years. Like Yadier Molina was a designated hitter as much as he was a catcher last year, I think. I'd have to actually confirm that. I might be wrong. But I know for a fact Joe Mauer played first base as much as he played catcher in some years where he was considered, for different awards and all-star games and things like that. So I don't think that this will negatively affect Tyler Stephenson's ability to be recognized by his peers and by folks around Major League Baseball.
Carlton says Stephenson was throwing really, really well before he got hurt. He doesn't think that Stephenson's ever going to be a power guy, but he thinks it'll be a run producer, like you were saying. I think the power is going to come. I think a lot of the gap power that Stephenson has, he's able to shoot the ball in the gap, a lot of doubles, a lot of hits off the wall. I think that some of that is tired legs. The guy is catching a lot. If he has fresher legs, I think that power is going to come. The hitting through the hips, the being able to drive the ball. I think that's going to make an appearance. And I know it hasn't yet in spring training, but it's early. I think come July, he could be launching some home runs at Great American Ballpark. It's just a guess on my part from what I've been seeing and what I think is going on. But we'll see if I'm right, because I think he could be a home run guy. He
clobbered one the other day. I think it was against the Royals, but he clobbered one the other day. My question to you would be, if his hitting profile mirrored that of Sean Casey, would he be a success or would he be a disappointment based on what his prospect ranking was?
Oh, he'd be considered a
because Sean Casey was never a home run guy, but he was a run producer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know what I think of that, Jeff. I think that I don't want to say anything bad about Sean Casey. So
no. And
I'm not joining that club with you either.
No. And I'm not disparaging Sean Casey. I'm saying that Sean Casey had a different profile than most first basemen. I think that people liked to compare him to other power hitting first basemen and still tried to belittle what he did because he wasn't a power hitting first baseman. But I think that Sean Casey was a good hitter. And I think that Tyler Stephenson is a good hitter because he can drive the ball to all fields. He can hit that extra base hit. It might not necessarily be a home run, but he can drop in a double whenever you got runners in scoring position. And there's been that discussion in recent years of, and the joke that, a home run's a rally killer or something like that. Like, if you've got guys on base and you're hitting doubles, is it more important than a guy who clears the bases with a home run? Not on the scoreboard, but there's that whole momentum conversation. So I think in the long run, I think the point is Tyler Stephenson is a good hitter. And I think for people to kind of put it in a box and say, well, does he hit enough home runs to be a good hitter? That is a silly conversation. Yeah,
and to your Sean Casey thing, he was much more Hal Morris than he was Big Papi, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Ted Vaughn asks the over-under number of times, I guess. Over-under number of times David Bell will have the same lineup 3 days in a row.
Ted, is this once, at any point during the season will we have three lineups?
Yeah. For it to be over under, it'd have to be. I don't know that it'll happen ever. I don't know that. I don't think that'll ever happen. I mean, for it to happen, all right. For them to have the same lineup 3 days in a row.
Health, and right-handed pitching.
Well, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. They're going to have an opposing pitcher of the same handed side 3 days in a row. So probably a right-handed pitcher, and everybody's going to have to be healthy. And I'm going to go out to say that they're not going to start Stephenson as an example, 3 days in a row at catcher. They're gonna, one of those 3 days he'll be at one of the other spots, which would make a change in the lineup. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the lineup will be the same 3 days in a row the entire season.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you think in a 162 game season you might get a point where the manager is comfortable with that, but we are talking about David Bell. David Bell loves to tinker even when his roster is playoff worthy. I mean, lest we forget, Scott Heineman started in this lineup whenever Nick Castellanos and Jesse Winker and all those guys were here. So I don't think so either. Just to be contrary, I'll say it happens once.
I think we're going back to some Derek Law talk here, Jeff.
As far as the last guy in the bullpen,
good.
Give me Derek Law. I'm telling you, there are
if we're only saying him versus Hunter Strickland, or over all those other guys we talked about too, Bennett Sousa, Alex Young.
Is there anyone on this roster? And I might say, I don't even know that I'd say this, because he's been bad, because at the beginning of spring training, I had a guy that I was like, okay, he's a non-roster invitee, but I would kind of like to see him make the roster. And that's Teheran Guerrero, because of the 104-mile-an-hour fastball. The only problem is he's been very bad with his command. So I don't know that I'm interested in seeing that. I still think I'd rather see him over Hunter Strickland, but is there anyone that you can think of that would be on this roster right now that you would rather see Hunter Strickland over that guy?
No, and Teheran Guerrero, I think, already got sent out to minor league camp right after coming back, right? So, for me, that last spot in the bullpen needs to be the best of whatever other lefty is available. Mm-hmm. And is that saying that it's going to be a great pitcher? Probably not. Is Bennett Sousa somebody I think is reliable all the time? No, I think he'll get blown up at times, but I really just think they need a second left-hander down there. And, you just take the best one of the options available to you, as far as I'm concerned.
When I've come around on the discussion about the second left-hander too, because part of this bullpen is just like the rest of the roster. We got to figure out what we got. And there is no one on this list other than Alexis Diaz that I know what we have. And I feel like if the Reds are going to make the decision to put Hunter Strickland on the roster because they know what they have, then they're saying that they're okay with their bullpen being bad, because we know Hunter Strickland is bad. I was talking to a Brewers guy the other day who said the same thing. His best season was as a Brewer. And the Brewers guy I was talking with, who's about to be our Lockdown Brewers host next week, guy named Chuck Freeman, he said, Hunter Strickland's bad.
Hey, listen, he can pitch twice a day. He can allow inherited runners to score at least 2 times a day, Jeff. What are you talking about?
Gosh.
Ronnie Snyder says, with Tyler Stephenson catching, Jose Barrero at second base, Ellie De La Cruz at shortstop, and Benson in center, they could have the best middle defense in all of baseball. That's not bad middle defense. I mean, that's really good defense up the middle.
Then we got India in left field.
India or designated hitter, or there's other spots to put India. That is really a good defensive combination. I don't know if they would make that move to Jose Barrero at second base. What do you think on that?
I think that if Jose Barrero is not playing shortstop, he's probably playing center field. And that would be as the right-handed platoon to Will Benson, who I almost want them out of the gate to just play him every day. I almost don't want them to expect Will Benson to need a platoon partner, because throughout his minor league career, he hasn't needed one other than the slugging. I've mentioned this a couple of different times. His batting average and his on-base percentage does not fall off gratuitously like Jake Fraley and I was wrong about TJ Friedl. TJ Friedl actually has better splits against left-handed pitching than he does right-handed. And I forget who called me out on the comments. I appreciate them for doing that. But Jake Fraley he can't hit left-handed pitching whatsoever. But I think that Jose Barrero is a guy that if he doesn't stick at shortstop, and they think it's time to switch him for Ellie De La Cruz, they're going to send him down to AAA and they're going to find another position to maybe try him out at. But yeah, second base could be interesting. They'd have to move India to DH or outfield before they do that.
Jared on vinyl says Alex Young should be in the bullpen without a doubt. If we're comparing, I don't know if without a doubt as a blanket statement flies with me, but if we're just talking about the final left-hander in the bullpen, compare for me, Jeff, Alex Young versus Bennett Souza. Which one do you take and why?
6-1, half dozen the other, I guess. I don't know. I've been more impressed with what I've seen from Alex Young. I don't think we've seen enough from Bennett Souza. The only problem is one is on the 40-man roster, Bennett Souza, and the other is not, Alex Young. So, but that just means you would flip-flop the two. Like, if you don't think Bennett Souza's the guy, then you drop him and you pick up Alex Young. So that's not a huge deal there. I think if I were picking between the two, I would pick Alex Young. But the only two guys that I would add to the bullpen without a doubt right now, and it's only because Tony Santillan's hurt, the only two guys I'd add to the bullpen without a doubt is Alexis Diaz and Lucas Sims.
Well, Dennis checks in and wants to talk about Fernando Cruz. He thinks Fernando Cruz should be a part of this bullpen. I think I saw Fernando on C-Trent's bullpen projection list.
He's pitched well in the World Baseball Classic.
Right. I could see Cruz being in this bullpen.
That's the thing too, is that he was on C-Trent's prediction, and so was Hunter Strickland. So Fernando Cruz was in the bullpen, and still somehow Hunter Strickland made it. So there's just, I mean, when you think about it, because you're going to have 5 starters, you're going to have 13 pitchers, so you have 8 bullpen spots. You've got Alexis Diaz and Lucas Sims for sure. Probably most likely Revar Sanmartin and Buck Farmer. So then you got 4 spots. You're probably including Ian Gibaut. You're probably including Fernando Cruz. So you got 2 spots left. And I would hope that we're talking about Joe Kunal and, Alex Young or Bennett Souza, not Joe Kunal and Hunter Strickland, or one of the lefties and Hunter Strickland. It just, you get down to those final 2 spots and it gets really, really difficult to convince yourself that the Reds aren't just going to give one of them to Hunter Strickland.
This talking about Hunter Strickland, I think, Saj says, I once went to lunch with my boss's boss. A couple of months later, I was promoted, and he told me it was because I was the only one who wanted to go to lunch with him. I put this up because Hunter Strickland and David Bell have a history. And that history goes back to, I forget what year they overlap somewhere, but they have a history. That could be a part of it. I mean,
I do think all managers
just really
have their
believe
guys,
in him, like he could just believe in him. And I don't.
No, and there's obvious, and we keep joking about it. I don't think there's a nefarious connection here. I think that there is a wholesome connection between David Bell and Hunter Strickland. It's just, we don't see it because all we see is what he does on the field, and what he does on the field is very unimpressive. So why we continue to try and see if that's going to change is beyond me. But, Saj has a point. There's probably something to this relationship with David Bell. I mean, remember, Dusty had his guys. Dusty had his Jerry Hairstons and his Corey Pattersons and guys like that we were just kind of like, yeah, maybe like Jerry Hairston when he was fine. Corey Patterson was a little erratic with his performances and things like that, but he just might be his guy. Yeah, I don't know.
David Brown checks in on the Davey Concepcion conversation. He says Concepcion was trying to get at bats with Woodward and Cheney as his competition. The big difference, the Reds' competition now at shortstop. I think this is what I was saying earlier too, Jeff, that listen, I don't really think there's anything that Jose Barrero can do to end up being the long-term shortstop of this team if Ellie De La Cruz hits. I mean, I don't think it matters what Jose Barrero does. And I think you're right. At the end of the day, somebody's moving to the outfield. And Jose Barrero, showed that he could develop some chops out there. He wasn't awful all
he
the
played
time,
center.
so he played center. I mean, again, so did Jesse Winker. So we don't have a high bar, but he did play a decent outfield.
Like we do this a lot, and we've done this a lot with Matt McClain, where we're like, well, he played center field in college. Jose Barrero did it in the major leagues. So he's got an argument where our positioning is concerned, as opposed to some other guy. Like, whenever we briefly mentioned that Spencer Steer could play in the outfield, only did that once at AAA. So I'm not necessarily making that part of the consideration here. Jose Barrero has done that. So if he were to move positions, I think that would be the first choice for the Reds, but they are moving into an era. I really think, and I don't think that this is just over optimistic bravado on my part for the Reds. I really think Will Benson's going to be something here. I really think he's going to take a hold of center field. And we're not just going to continue to talk about that as a position where, hey, you know what? If this guy doesn't figure it out at this position, he could play center field. Like, Will Benson's going to be that guy.
Jared talking about Jonathan India says India's looked good in spring, good at bats, making good contact, still needs to work on his range at second base. But he says he will definitely be a bounce back season for Jonathan India. And he thinks Jonathan could be a top on base percentage guy in the National League. What do you think, Jeff? Top
for sure
on base percentage guy?
I think he'll approach it. Maybe not the top, but probably tops for second baseman. I mean, even through the struggle that we know last year to be, his career on base percentage is still 36%. So I would love to see that continue and maybe even improve a little bit. He's got the ability to get on base and be a nuisance to pitchers on the base path.
This is funny, Mark, when we were doing the transition, getting to the nitty gritty. Now kick out the audio, guys. That's funny. Malachi asked, are we worried about Tyler Stephenson striking out a bunch and Jonathan India not being able to hit? Well, we were just talking about that. I think Jonathan India is going to be fine. Yeah. I don't know how great he's going to be, but he's going to be fine. I think the injuries really are a lot of what went wrong for him in that sophomore season. I'm not worried about Tyler Stephenson striking out a bunch. He doesn't have that long loopy swing. I mean, he's not really selling out everything to be a home run guy. I think the power is going to come naturally just from, like I was saying earlier, his legs being better, but I don't think he's going to try to be a power hitter and strike out more because of it. I'm not worried about that.
And I think that Tyler Stephenson is a smart player. And just down the locker row from him is Joey Votto, who's one of the smartest hitters that ever lived. And I'm sure that he's picked his brain a time or two. And there's been very few players who have been less inspiring in spring training than Joey Votto. Joey Votto's spring training numbers are abysmal, but that's because he uses spring training to really get his eye in tune and ready for the regular season. And I think Tyler Stephenson is probably doing the same thing. Plus, the other part of that question is striking out a bunch in today's game is completely different than it used to be. Like, there's a lot of guys who strike out a lot. You know who strikes out a bunch? Jose Barrero. I mean, to be completely honest, I know that we talked about, what do we not know about him? I know for a fact that what he has shown so far in 282 at-bats is he has struck out 119 times. There's no debating that. So that percentage is a little bit too crazy, and I would love to see that come down just a smidge. But when it comes to striking out a bunch, Tyler Stephenson is nowhere near what we consider a bunch in today's baseball.
Oh, there was a strikeout dating joke that you could have zinged me with, and you didn't. So I appreciate you.
Wasn't
who's going to lead in strikeouts? Thanks for not doing that to me this time. I appreciate you. Yeah, Joseph Nelson says, great show as usual. He wanted our opinion on who do we think is the better defensive shortstop, Newman or Barrero?
I think Barrero, based on who he could be. And I think
Barrero. Now, today.
I think Barrero's baseline is better than Newman. I think Newman is a solid defender. I think Barrero could be a Gold Glove defender.
Yeah, I think they're equal footing. I would say that, it's what you said earlier, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? Like, I think they're on equal footing. I think that the ceiling for Jose Barrero is a lot more than the ceiling for Kevin Newman. But I think right now, either one of those guys that when you run them out there, are going to give you adequate defense up the middle. It's not going to be lights out, but it's going to be adequate.
For reference, like Jose Barrero has 282 career at bats, less than 300 career plate appearances. Kevin Newman has 1,663 plate appearances and 1,545 at bats. Kevin Newman has exactly like 2 wins above replacement more than Jose Barrero does. And Kevin Newman's career WAR is 1.1. So, I'm sorry, I think I looked at that wrong. It's just a smidge over 2. So Kevin Newman and comparing Kevin Newman and Jose Barrero is you are comparing like the parachute for Jose Barrero. They brought Kevin Newman in case Jose Barrero bottoms out and Elly De La Cruz isn't ready to be called up yet. They didn't bring him in to have a competition with Jose Barrero. Jose Barrero is going to be the opening day shortstop. It just depends on how long he keeps that role.
BR7 says all great teams have great team chemistry, and if the Reds can get that, I don't see why they can't kick butt this year. Yeah, I think that's what Jonathan India is. I think that's kind of what he's been trying to say. I mean, he's talked openly about how deflated and derailed the team was after the trades last year. And just the entire chemistry being off and things being just so different and their friends gone and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's part of what India has been talking about when he talks about being a leader and trying to be a different guy this season. So, I agree with this. If India is successful in helping to foster a close-knit group in this clubhouse, which is going to be difficult because, as Jeff keeps telling all of you guys, the roster that breaks camp is going to be a very different looking team, probably as early as June, I would say. Yeah. I really think the influx of the young guys starts in June. So it's never really going to be a settled roster all year long, which makes guys like India that will be around the whole time, guys like Stephenson who will be around the whole time, and even behind the scenes, guys like Votto who have been around a long time. It really adds to the importance of them being able to create inclusive environment for these young players as they come in. And, the days in Major League Baseball of true hazing are over. We see some things that are usually done in good fun with the rookies, but it's not like the old days, right? It's much more inclusive and welcoming. So I think that the veterans now in India and Stephenson, that seems so weird. The veterans and those guys are gonna be largely responsible for creating that chemistry and keeping that group together and building those bonds as these young prospects come in throughout the year.
Well, and let's kind of put that idea to the test. They said, we started off last year just so confused and flat because of all of the roster moves and things like that. Like, obviously they started the season the second worst start in the history of baseball at 3-22. In the month of May, they were above 500. And I think in the month of June, they were above 500 as well. It's just when you're 19 games under 500, that doesn't matter. You've got to be dramatically above 500 to offset that. But the fact that it seemed like they were starting to come together as a team in May and June and even parts of July before they started trading people, that I think there's something to that. And I think that while it's not going to equate to a playoff team this year, it's also not going to equate to a 100 loss team that I have seen some folks being like, oh, this team is awful. They're garbage. They're not going to win a bunch. This team is going to be much better this year than they were last year.
I just need them to be 4 wins better. That's where we're at. They have to win 66 games, Jeff. That's my magic number.
And if they hit that 80 wins, we are just, I don't know, we might have a party on a podcast where you and I just scream for 30 seconds or 30 minutes.
Just Blanton's podcast. Is that what we're doing? We're just gonna
it might be the
open
most
up our Eagle
incoherent
Rares
podcast you ever heard of, but yeah.
Maybe we should do that one time. That one won't make it into the audio.
Anybody
feed,
wants
guys.
to hear that,
The
but yeah.
one's gonna All right, let's see what else we got. I like there's a lot of comparisons going on in the chat, Jeff. And here's one I think is interesting. Chris wants to ask about Noelvi Marte. Do we think Marte is better than Barrero? And maybe not right this second.
I think
he looked good in spring. I think the power's got to come along just a little bit more. I think ultimately, if you're asking, will Marte end up as an infielder on the Cincinnati Reds and Barrero not? I would say that's probably likely. I still, like I was saying earlier, I think Barrero is going to move someplace else, but I think Marte could be a higher ceiling player. Does that track for you?
The only thing I have with this one is if we're thinking Ellie De La Cruz comes up and takes shortstop and maybe you move Barrero to third base, then we compare the two, because I think the Reds need to officially change the designation of Noelvi Marte. Like, I'm still seeing him on prospect list as a shortstop. He is not a shortstop anymore. He's a third baseman. Like,
that's correct.
They have made that clear through the Arizona Fall League and what they have been doing in spring training. He's going to play third base. He's not going to play shortstop, because there's so many different guys that are better defensively at shortstop, but Noelvi Marte's bat is still going to play well at that third base spot. So I think overall, if you're telling me in a realm of reality where Jose Barrero moves to third base and he's compared to Noelvi Marte, I think Noelvi Marte has a better career than Jose Barrero.
And I think the Reds should keep that in mind. That's something that's been kind of rattling around in my head. If you're going to move Jose Barrero, move him one time. Look down the line at the system. So don't move Barrero from shortstop to third, and then from third to part-time second base, and then from second base to the outfield. Don't force him into some utility pigeonhole that he's not really equipped to play right now. Don't Nick Senzel him. But if you're gonna find another spot for him, identify it, and it's going to be outfield. We can look down the system right now and see the weakness is in the outfield. So make that conversion, but don't screw around with a little bit of third base, a little bit of second base, a little bit of shortstop, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I don't like that. I think if they really want him to be a capable Major League Baseball player at a certain position, just put him there already. And, he can play all three outfield positions. So outfield for me is where his finish line is.
Yeah, I think that if he doesn't stick on a shortstop this season, outfield, I would agree. That's where you're going to move.
So Carrick Melvin checks in, and this is interesting statement, and I really want to get your reaction to this, Jeff. Carrick says Barrero is the second best defensive shortstop in the system. Arroyo is number one. Mm-hmm. So Edwin Arroyo, I think high A he's going to be at this year.
Arroyo? He's starting in Dayton.
Dayton.
Yeah, that's what Tom Nichols was telling us. He's going to be there in Dayton. I agree with that. My only and if we're just talking about defensively, I know that Jose Torres was also considered a very good defensive player. It's just they moved him to second base because he was on the same team with Ellie De La Cruz. So they wanted Ellie De La Cruz to play shortstop. Based on how everyone has scouted these players, that is what it is. Like, Jose Barrero's got a better glove than Ellie De La Cruz. It's just if his bat continues to be around the 200 marker below, I think that there's a realm of reality where they're just like, all right, we know that we can port his defense into the outfield. Maybe he can go down to AAA and continue to work on his new adjustments and maybe figure it out with the bat. And then we can call him up and see if he can play the outfield. But we're going to give the shortstop position to Ellie De La Cruz. I think in a couple of years as well, as Ellie De La Cruz, and this is a conversation for down the line once he is a major leaguer, but as Ellie De La Cruz, continues to, strength and bulk up and things like that, he's going to be too big to play shortstop. I think it just gets almost elementary at that point that when you're 6'5" and just a behemoth, you really aren't a shortstop anymore. So Edwin Arroyo may become that shortstop in a couple of years. But again, he's not close to the major leagues like Ellie De La Cruz is.
Jared on Vinyl says Arroyo is the second coming of Lindor.
I love that.
I'll take that. Speaking of Lindor,
that.
Are you guys watching the World Baseball Classic? I know Jeff and I are watching the World Baseball Classic. Did you see Lindor's Little League home run?
That was great.
That was a lot of fun. It was this. Listen, the world. I know. Let's talk about the World Baseball Classic for just a minute. Because I'm super interested in it. I think it's so much fun. I will tell you that people may say that baseball, started as America's pastime, America's game, whatever you want to say. We are doing it all wrong as fans. If you want to figure out how to do it as fans, watch the Puerto Rico Venezuela game, or watch these
fans,
Latin American. Yes. The energy. I mean, someone tweeted like, this feels like playoff baseball. It's better than playoff baseball. The energy in the stands for these international competition games is better than we see in the World Series in the United States. The energy from the fans. I love the World Baseball Classic, and I understand Major League Baseball fans, teams, executives, players themselves, as far as pitchers go, reluctance to want to really go all out in the World Baseball Classic. And I understand why you wouldn't want to pause the season around the All-Star break and let pitchers go pitch in this international competition. I get it. That being said, I really want them to stop the season in July and play the World Baseball Classic. Yeah. It's so much fun.
There's something to it. And I mean, watching different, games for Japan or maybe Chinese Taipei, or like you said, like Puerto Rico, Venezuela, something like that. Like those fans have like songs for players that they sing. It's almost like a soccer match. Like you hear different soccer fans and they're chanting and they're singing and things like that. And at baseball games, like you equate the atmosphere at a baseball game to just like a really laid back, like chill vibe. It's pretty quiet unless something awesome happens and everybody's standing up and cheering. And then they go back to sitting down and just chilling. That's not how those fans roll. Like Japanese fans have a song for every player, and they're up and they're singing and they're chanting, and they're just in for every single moment. And I remember different discussions about, extending the netting down the foul line and stuff and protecting fans. And I think that's a great idea. Protecting fans is a good idea. But some of the reasoning they were using is, well, fans are on their phones and they're talking to each other and they're not paying attention to the game. And it's just like, that's not what these international fans are doing, man. Like around the world, these fans, the way they watch baseball, it puts us to shame. It puts American baseball fans to shame. And I mean, I don't know. And I don't know that we could get this started at Great American Ballpark, at least this year, but it'd be fun to have different songs for different players and things like, and chants and stuff to get involved in whenever you're at Great American Ballpark, because that would just create such an amazing atmosphere.
Bowtie bar karaoke. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah, there we go.
That is exactly what we need. All right, we're pushing up against the hour and a half mark, Jeff. Let's take just a couple more. I've let this one run a kind of long because it's the last one for this off season. So we'll do a few more. Mr. E, I want to circle back to Aristides Aquino because this is important. This is an important point that we're going to get into right here. Mr. E says about Aquino that Aquino was starting to hit at the end of last season and he will be a top player in Japan. Yes, he will be a top player in Japan, but do not get it twisted. Folks, the Japanese Baseball League, while good, is not Major League Baseball. It is not an equivalent league. It is not it's 4A. Yeah. We're going to call it 4A. It's better than AAA in America. It is not good. It is not as good as Major League Baseball. Every time the Reds have sent Aristides Aquino down to AAA, he has hit the baseball because he is a classic 4A player. Not quite good enough to be a full-time major leaguer, a little bit better than the AAA guys in the system. He's going to thrive in Japan, but don't confuse that with the Reds having missed out on him or given up on him too soon or done anything wrong with the handling of Aristides Aquino. I maintain that because the outfield situation was so jacked up during Aristides Aquino's time in Cincinnati, he got way more opportunity than he ever should have been given. And yes, he had a cannon for an arm and could throw the baseball very hard, very far, very fast. And that's great. But he could not hit the broadside of a barn outside of that wild August when he came up and nobody knew who he was. So don't get confused when you see what Aristides Aquino does in Japan. I will be shocked if he's not one of their top players, but he's always been a top 4A player.
And I also think too, when it comes to Aquino, I kind of had him marked as a change of scenery guy that would probably benefit from that, because when he came up as a Red, he hit all those home runs in his first month and he thought he knew everything. So that when major league pitchers finally adjusted to him, he's just like, well, I know everything. I'm going to figure this out. And he just never did. And people gave him advice. And, we had that thing last year where Eric Davis was on a television broadcast saying that he just doesn't listen. It's because when he debuted, he had all of the success right away and he thought he knew everything. And so when he goes somewhere else where it's totally different people that he doesn't know, an environment he's not used to, and people are telling him the same things that Reds coaches were telling him for years, he's going to be like, you know what? Maybe they had a point, and I'll make those adjustments that they're telling me to make. And we could see him pop off. That still doesn't mean that I think that the Reds will have missed out on him, because I think that for him personally, that had to happen. Because if he had stayed with the Reds, he would have made those adjustments. And I would love for him to figure it out. And I would love for him to go crazy wherever he ends up. But at the end of the day, it was never going to be as a Red.
Dave Pemberton. Hey, Dave, how you doing? Dave checks in and says, do we think the 2023 attendance at Great American Ballpark will be above or below? Here's an over-under for you, Jeff. The historic low at the ballpark.
Currently, on one of my favorite apps, who's actually about to become a sponsor next week, but on one of my favorite ticketing apps, opening day tickets are below $100. Actually, there's a couple that are below 80. I think that's a bad sign for this line. Now, could Ellie De La Cruz come up and go crazy, and could some prospects come up and really just go crazy? CES, Matt McClain, possibly, but I think that lags behind. Like, if they have a good month, you're still talking about the next month before people really start to buy in. I could see it being over, but by like single digits.
Well, I'm going to take the over on this one because my buddy Jeff told me never pass over a good over, right? But no, here's why. There's going to be prospects debut in 2023. Yeah. Every time that happens, there's going to be a little bump in attendance. By July, we're going to know what's happening with Joey Votto. We're going to know if there's a little farewell tour going on or not. And I suspect even if he's playing well, it's probably going to be some type of farewell tour. Now that I've purchased it, I've already bought tickets to the final home game of the season, because that's probably going to be Joey Votto's last game as a Red. I think people are going to come out for that. All of those things will keep them from setting a new historic low. Now, I'm not saying attendance is going to be great, Jeff. I don't think we're going to have any problem finding our favorite rail to stand on when we're at games, but I don't think they're going to hit a new historic low because of those things.
No, I think lots about this team are going to improve a lot more than people think they will. Attendance might be the last one of them to improve the way that we hope they could. But for you and me, and for diehard fans, and for folks who want to be at the ballpark every day, which that's a group that continues to get smaller by the year. But those folks are going to find some good ticket prices to get into the stadium. Overall, though, I think that by the end of the season, we are going to be seeing the roster that is going to be here for multiple years. We're going to see the core that is going to get this team back to the postseason, and everybody understands that what's going to happen at the end of this year is going to be so impactful for years to come. I've already seen plenty of people in the comments just like, why did they send down CES, or why did they send down Matt McClain, or why did they send down Ellie De La Cruz? They should just let them play, because these veteran retreads that they keep throwing out there aren't going to be anything at all. And I would rather see these young kids play and maybe, struggle a little bit, learn their ropes, get ready for the major leagues at the major league level, than to continue watch some retread guy like Hunter Strickland fail and just waiting on the future.
All right, we're going to take two more, and then we're going to get out of here, folks. We have crossed the hour and a half mark. Thank you guys so much. The chat is still blowing up. There's no way we're going to get through even a smidgen of what's left. So I'm going to take just a couple more. Ken Waller says, Jeff, you keep referring to the team being above 500 in May, but then they traded the four best guys and they didn't replace them. That's another reason why this team's going to be better, and why I was confident in that they are going to win 4 more games, 66, 4 more games this season. They're going to be better. There's not going to be a great offloading of talent. I mean, realistically, Will Myers, if he performs at Great American Ballpark, could be a trade guy. And if they get lucky on a dude like Pinder, or if they get lucky on somebody needing some shortstop depth, and maybe Newman, they could offload Newman. But none of the everyday starter guys that are on this team in July starting baseball games, I think need to worry about being traded. I don't see that. So the chemistry is not going to get disrupted. As you say, Ken, the talent's not going to be shipped off and then not replaced. I really, Jeff, you make me crazy, because you and your ridiculous stake bets and 80 win whatevers that you're doing. It takes me a while to catch up with your crazy ass optimism, but like, I sit back and I think about it later, and I'm like, all right, Jeff's a little overzealous. Jeff's a little excitable, but 70 wins is really not that big a stretch. Right. When you start talking 75, 80, you lose me just a skosh. Like, are they 15 wins better in 2023 than they were in 2022? And then I'm like, well, if they don't have to start Mark Colesbury at catcher,
yeah,
and Taylor Motter's not playing third base, they might. We
don't have TJ Zoik on the mound.
They might be 10 to 15 games. Man, you make me crazy. So I'm willing to go on board with 70 wins being reasonable as a ceiling.
Well, and
then anything after that's gravy. Anything after that is just woo. But
let's not even look at a whole season. What do you think is more likely to happen? This team will go on multiple 10-game win streaks, or this team will go on multiple 10-game losing streaks? Because I think
win streaks.
Yeah, I think win streaks
starting pitching. There's enough great guys in that rotation to bust up losing streaks. So, and I just don't see how they repeat April. I mean, listen. And I've seen a couple bad Aprils. Was it like 2018 that they started out pretty close to that bad? Like they won 5
19,
games.
I think.
Yeah. Brian Price was the manager. They lost. Yeah. They only won like 5 games in April, something like that. So, I mean, it happens, but they're good. They've got to win more games in April.
And that's just the law of averages. That's not us being optimistic. That's like literally
like me crazy. Everybody. Then I get lumped in with you all the time with your crazy optimism, and it's like, wait a minute. Anyway,
I'm just ready. I'm ready to get me a stake this year. They're gonna win at least 75 games. So
Debbie Brown's with us again today. Debbie, thanks for always being here on Fridays. We appreciate you. She says she's watching. It was heartbreaking watching Edwin get hurt and Alexis crying. I hope the U.S. does good. talking about the Puerto Rico fans, that game was fun to watch. It just was so much fun to watch. But yeah, if you're not watching the World Baseball Classic, you are definitely missing out. All right, I'm going to try and find a good question to end on here, Jeff. While I'm doing that, talk about next weekend, the start of the season, what we've got coming up, and then I'll have a question for us.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great stuff coming up down the pipe. In fact, coming up not next Monday, but the Monday after that, Monday, March 27th. We're going to be live, or I'm going to be live at Fretboard Brewery in Blue Ash with Mo Egger from ESPN 1530 and 700 WLW. Come out and meet us live and in person. That'll be great. Unfortunately, Steve is coming into town that week. He's just going to be coming in a couple of days late, so he won't be able to be at Fretboard with us, but we're going to be live and in person at Fretboard Brewery in Blue Ash, one of my favorite breweries in the city of Cincinnati. If you've never been to Fretboard, like, little bit of free advertising. They've got just amazing beer and great barbecue there and a great atmosphere as well. They do a lot of live music, concerts and events and things like that. And they do a great job whenever it comes to presenting like sports. Like right now you could go there. They have multiple televisions to watch the NCAA tournament on. But Fretboard, March 27th in the evening. That's a Monday. So it's definitely going to be in the evening, waiting on a specific time, but I think it's going to be like probably 7 o'clock, 6 or 7 o'clock Eastern time at Fretboard. We're going to be live and in person. And then, of course, like I mentioned, Monday, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the opening day roster and those extension ideas that Malachi brought up and shouted out, because I think I saw like an update on my phone or something from The Athletic about this article. But the idea of a couple of 5-year extensions where the numbers look very tantalizing for Tyler Stephenson and Jonathan India. We're going to talk about what that could mean for the Reds coming up on Monday's episode.
All right, here's where we're going to end. Cody is asking about moving Jonathan India to third base and playing Steer at second. I don't know. I think this is interesting, actually. What do you think on this, Jeff? I think if we keep India around and all of these prospects that are coming up come up, I feel like India becomes an outfielder or a designated hitter. I think he eventually gets squeezed off the infield.
My only, and this is even a reservation about moving him to left field, but my only reservation with the idea of moving him back to third base is I believe initially he was moved to second base because his arm wasn't that great. Like it was fine to below average. And a below average arm at third base, which I think probably Spencer Steer is right there as well. But if you're swapping those two guys, it's still only going to be short term. It's going to be until either Matt McLean is ready to come up and play second base or Noelvi Marte is ready to come and play third base. Because I think ultimately the move, if you're moving Jonathan India, is the left field. But it's the arm that gives me pause, because at second base, you don't need to have a good arm. You just need to have good range and a good glove and good reflexes. And then you can just flip it to first base whenever you need to. So I think that would exacerbate some deficiencies in his fielding profile more so than it would help Spencer Steer. And again, I still think these are, spring training bugaboos that he's getting out of the way. And I don't necessarily think that his fielding is going to be the problem in the regular season that some people have made it out to be over the last week.
All right. Well, on that note, that's going to be the last question, folks. Look, these Aloha Lives have been so much fun, and just shout out to you guys because you're what make them so great. If you haven't turned your notifications on here on YouTube, turn them on. There's going to be lives, guys. We are going to be here live. We just aren't going to schedule them. I'm going to jump on and do some pregame stuff. Jeff's going to jump on and do some post-game stuff. We're going to jump on together when we're available and do some things. So make sure you have hit the notifications. We want you guys here because you're what really drives this thing. This has been so much fun. Can't wait to bring it back again next off season. But that's going to do it for this off season's coverage of the Aloha Live Friday shows. We're going to be with you 5 days a week throughout the season with podcasts and YouTube videos, just like we always are. None of that's changing. We're just not going to be live on every Friday. They'll be in your the Friday show will be in your feed, just like all the rest during the week. And with that being said, Jeff, present your closing arguments and wrap us up.
Steve, that'll do it for us here on our final Aloha Friday until next off season. Thanks everybody for joining in. Thanks for your comments, your questions, and everything. I know we didn't get to nearly everybody because we just had so many people in the comment area. Thank you so much for that. Coming up on Monday, like we said, we'll talk about the opening day roster. We'll talk a little bit about extension ideas for India and Stephenson, and we'll be all over what's going on in spring training for your Cincinnati Reds. Now make sure you go check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. For those of you that love to play fantasy baseball, Matt and Dom will have you covered every single day on the best strategies to help you win your league. That's Locked On Fantasy Baseball. It's just like Locked On Reds. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts and right here on YouTube. Steve, we are 13 days away. I know you couldn't count earlier, so I'll help you out. 13 days away from opening day. And we still have a few questions about what the roster could look like. So what's that mean for you and me?
Well, that means that we are going to continue to monitor the transactions. We're going to continue to monitor the rumors, the waiver wires. Waiver wires are going to be interesting next week, folks. Things are starting to heat up. Be right here because Jeff and I are going to be dialed in on them. We will report back right here in your podcasting feeds and keep you locked on Reds every single day. I think Jeff's going to get waived.
Happy St. Patty's.